What year is it? Oh, hey, it's me again. And I overslept. November is coming up and... Great. I missed Novemberween. Speaking of the beginning of years, 1993 was a pretty chaotic one. It gave us the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Eritrea, Bill Clinton, the end of the Bolivian Revolution, the Iraq disarmament crisis, the Burundian Civil War, and Sega's continued expansion of the Sonic brand. Guess which one we're going to talk about? Sega managed to land a deal with Burger King this year. Need I say more? We also got Sonic the Comic by Fleetway, which is just plain weird. Like, look at this. Look at it! I read this thing and I still barely know what's going on. Luckily, it was landlocked in Europe, so us American nerds wouldn't find out about it until the advent of the... Nah. Over here we had the Sonic comics from publisher Archie, which is another subject entirely which deserves its own set of videos going through it. Thankfully, someone already did that. It is just as confusing as Sonic the Comic, with its own brand of chaotic nonsense and tomfoolery that goes unmatched in the Sonic canon. For instance, this comic's version of Eggman is actually just a Robotnik from a different universe that successfully killed his Sonic, conquered his universe, got bored, and went to this universe to have a challenge. And that's just Eggman. I haven't even mentioned any of the other villains. The Geneva Convention? They've never heard of it. The only thing they've heard of is the Geneva Checklist. Archie has some of the most unique characters and interesting concepts in the entire Sonic series, in my opinion. Such as the Egg Bosses, the Secret Freedom Fighters, Dr. Finitivus, Mammoth Mogul, Scourge, the various alien planets that show up from time to time, the crossover with Mega Man, the SatAM characters getting a much more character development than they could possibly get in the show, and so much more. It's a really cool series that starts strong, dips into being awful for 100 or so issues, then Flynn jumps on the writer's bench and gives us the rest of the comic that is genuinely my favorite Sonic media, period. And even though the really cool stuff they built up over more than a decade got canned because Archie is a really stupid company that loses track of important documents faster than the speed of light, and Ken Penders took advantage of that, we have fan-made continuations like Archie Sonic Online for those who missed the old comic, or even the IDW Sonic comics and Sonic Legacy for those who want a simpler story with less context needed. Now, I read the Sonic Archie comics all the time growing up, which is the main reason I fell in love with the Blue Rodent. But I never watched any of the shows that it was based on. The two shows were called Sonic SatAM and The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. Both ran at the same time, so Sonic fans were eaten good with 2 whole series of cartoons and a whole bunch of comics to boot. Sonic SatAM is technically just called Sonic the Hedgehog, but there are already multiple things in the series called Sonic the Hedgehog, so everybody calls it Sonic SatAM since it was aired on Saturday mornings. Despite being aired on the time usually reserved for goofy antics, its premise was fairly serious. Sonic and friends live in a dystopian wasteland where Robotnik has taken the world hostage and turned most of their friends into machines. They have to take down the dictatorial madman and find a way to restore the populace to their fleshy selves without getting killed or turned into a robot in the process. Sure, there's jokes and some pretty funny moments, but at its core, this is a very serious story. But this seriousness is usually balanced out by comedy episodes, where a French coyote makes you attempt to rip off your own ears. At the end, they actually do defeat Robotnik, and it sets up his nephew Snively, yes, Snively, he was a very important character in this, to be the main villain for Season 3. The show was cancelled and we never saw Snively's plan come to fruition. Thankfully, this is yet another example of the Sonic fandom continuing a dead story to make sure it gets a proper ending. Check out Team Season 3, they're working at making a finished SatAM a reality, and it's so cool to see the fans do what Sega don't. And the other show is Looney Tunes. The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog is a very wacky series in comparison. The most serious it gets is during the Sonic Says PSAs, where Sonic tells the kiddos not to break the law or burn their hands on the stove. Other than that, it's slapstick, puns, goofy shenanigans, and everything else you would expect from a typical silly cartoon. The only thing missing is a left turn at Albuquerque. Shifting back over to games, Sega's arcade exploits actually do continue with Segasonic Cosmo Fighter, which is another kiddie arcade ride released only in Japan and is fine. Looks kind of like Galaga. Segasonic Popcorn Shop was a simple popcorn maker mixed with a game. It's a fun little distraction and gets referenced in Sonic Mania. Apparently the popcorn itself wasn't all that great, so it didn't last long after the novelty wore off. The last arcade cabinet is the closest to an actual game these have gotten so far. Segasonic Arcade, or just Segasonic the Hedgehog over here in the US, is a trackball arcade game that introduced Mighty and Ray into the Sonic canon. They will proceed to be used by the comics, 2 games, and nothing else like the absolute chads they are. Now, Segasonic itself controls like a wet bar of soap on a sailboat deck. You slide around like crazy and gravity is your enemy. And dying is like the soap falling off the ship. You have to cough up another quarter for another bar of soap that has the exact same problems as the old one. But enough talk about soap, let's talk about compact discs! Sonic CD was this year's claim to fame in the Sonic timeline, its main introductions to the series being Amy Rose and Metal Sonic, expanding the cast by just a little bit. Now you may be asking why it's called Sonic CD. Well, that's because it is exclusive to the Sega CD add-on for the Genesis. Yep, to play this one, your Genesis just isn't enough. You need to strap a CD player to it with duct tape. Because we're now using CDs instead of cartridges, this of course means that there's a lot more storage space to work with. And as a result, Sonic CD is much more focused on exploration. You got to use Sonic's momentum to reach hidden areas and find secrets. Put simply, you have to run around in these massive levels that all have 4 variations each. Find the robot generator, grab 50 rings and make it to the end with them, and don't forget about the dozens of nooks and crannies with extra lives, rings, and shields. There's a lot! In case you didn't catch it in the verbal barrage, I'll say it again. This game brings back the Sonic 1 way of doing special stages where you need 50 rings at the end of a level. I think Sonic 2's checkpoint system is much better, so going back to this way of doing things was a little annoying. The special stages themselves are pretty unique, with Sonic fully controllable in this 3D-like plane where you have to take down all the UFOs while trying not to run out of time. It controls like a tank sometimes, but if you do manage to get your filthy Hedgehog hands on an emerald, oh wait, it's not the Chaos Emeralds this time, it's the Time Stones, because this entire game's gimmick is time travel. Never trust time travel. Last time all I got was a copy of Sonic 2. And that might sound like a good deal, but it was Sonic 2 for the Game Gear. Disappointment is an understatement. Each zone has 4 variations: past, present, bad future, and good future. You start each normal level in the present, which has nothing particularly special about it, but is the most recognizable version of each zone. The past is a more lush tropical theme that houses the robot generator that eventually destroys the zone in the future. The bad future is the default future if you don't do anything special to stop Robotnik from destroying the zone with his machines. It's generally more hazardous and decrepit looking, but if you destroy the robot generator in the past and then travel all the way to the future, you'll instead get the happy, badnik-free good future. It even gives you a different level complete screen. Now, the third act of every zone is locked to the future version of that zone. If you broke the generators in both of the acts beforehand, it's the good future. Otherwise, it's the bad. This is supposed to encourage the player to find the generators and destroy them. But some of these things are so well hidden that 9-year-old me didn't know that they existed past the first stage, much less what they even did. I know you were probably supposed to read the manual to figure this all out, but the game should be able to tell you the base mechanics without needing an external piece of paper to do it for them. And in my case, we didn't even have one! So I couldn't actually, get a Sega Genesis and Sega CD, obviously, but, I found one. They're still in the wild. You can still find these. It's just gonna run you about... It's expensive, don't buy retro consoles. The game opens with a full-motion video animation of Sonic running to this game's setting, the Little Planet. Eggman has chained it to a mountain and is holding it hostage for the time powers inside. It's up to Sonic to take Egghead down and set the little planet free. This animation is mostly here to demonstrate the sheer power of the Sega CD. It can play full motion video! Not a whole lot of it, mind you, and not in very high quality, but regardless, this was a feat nearly impossible on consoles past. But anyway, let's go through the zones themselves, starting with Palm Tree Panic Zone. It's your standard tropical forest with palm trees and everything the player needs to understand the game. Rings, badniks, slopes, time travel signs, springs, etc, etc. The boss is an absolute joke, especially if you pick up the invincibility power-up that hides near the beginning. It's a good time, no other comments. Collision Chaos seems like an expanded version of Spring Yard, similar to Casino Night, but unlike Sonic 2's Casino Night that has an entirely different style, this one sticks pretty close to Spring Yard's pink and orange color scheme. This is where we are introduced to both Amy and Metal Sonic. Amy is very clearly in love with Sonic, and of course that means she gets kidnapped immediately. You have existed for all of 5 seconds and have already got to save your hide. Are you kidding me? The boss of the zone is very similar to Casino Night, with it being much more like a little pinball table you have to beat rather than a normal boss fight. Foreshadowing the narrative, the third zone is Tidal Tempest, the water zone. It's just a little annoying at times, but doesn't get anywhere close to Labyrinth Zone levels of pain and suffering. The boss is absolutely pathetic. There seems to be some kind of trend where most of the bosses are completely pathetic, and then the final boss is unreasonably hard. Where are all the bosses in the middle? That's not what I meant, and you know it! The fourth zone is Quartz Quadrant. This one has some of my favorite music in the whole series and is a mining facility in the middle of a swamp. The past version has more emphasis on the swamp, the good feature has more emphasis on the quartz, and the bad feature says screw it and makes it a hellscape of rotting machinery. The boss here is very different since you just have to survive long enough for the thing to destroy itself. 9-year-old me did not understand that and repeatedly tried to jump at Eggman or knock the bouncing balls into him. 9-year-old me was not very intelligent. The fifth zone is Wacky Workbench. It's a factory of some kind that's got all kinds of wacky machinery that's hell-bent on stopping you dead in your tracks or flinging you halfway across the workbench in the wrong direction. The past is the factory under construction, the bad future is a ruined version, and the good future is pink. I severely dislike this zone. The design of the level has the exit on the bottom right of the stage, but the entire bottom floor will periodically activate and bounce you up to the very top should you so much as touch it with your toe. So unless you're really careful and extremely patient, you'll be running back down the staircases 10,000 times because every single time you make it down, the floor is active and you're right back where you started. Let me leave! Going right from the worst level to one of the best, Stardust Speedway. This is a super fast-paced zone whose every gimmick is to aid you in going Nyeh! Speed pads, launchers, ball-rolling chutes, and a whole lot more. It's a blast to go through, and is also the zone where 9-year-old me found out how the good future mechanic worked because I had so much fun in the past of both of the first acts that I broke both generators on complete accident. So when I went to the boss fight and it was the good future instead of the bad, you can imagine my confusion. Why is it pink? The past is an old Roman-looking city with vines and vegetation everywhere, the bad future is a dystopian wasteland, and the good future is like a weird pink amusement park. Hey, I've seen this one before.
What do you mean you've seen this? It's brand new.
The boss fight itself is the iconic race against Metal Sonic. It's pretty good. This one manages to fall in that middle-of-the-road difficulty where it's not a pushover, but isn't complete misery, so props to Sega for that. Beating Metal Sonic lets you save Amy Rose and move on to the final zone, Metallic Madness. This is basically a more refined and interesting version of Scrap Brain Zone from the first game. Traps, badniks, and spikes are everywhere. The past shows the base being built, the bad future has it destroyed, and the good future is pink. The final boss has a very different music track with an operatic sound accompanying the usual mechanical beats. It can be somewhat difficult sometimes, but usually he's not that hard. Just hit him when the things aren't spinning and you're in the clear. Beating him plays the credits, which has some more animation for you to enjoy depicting Sonic making his way through each area and escaping the exploding Metallic Madness Zone. If you manage to get all the time stones, the planet is free and the game is over. But if you didn't, Eggman uses the time stones to reverse everything you just did and set the planet back under his control. Try again! Hold it. We interrupt this zone discussion to point out that Sega of America is weird. Every single time Sega of Japan sends something over for them to sell, they take a look and go, you know what, this isn't American enough, and change a bunch of names and stuff to appeal to American audiences. They changed the Mega Drive to the Genesis, Eggman became Robotnik, and nearly the entire soundtrack of Sonic CD was thrown out and replaced. Yeah, there are actually 2 soundtracks for this game. The Japanese one being much more upbeat and typical of 90s Sonic games, and the American one being much more spatial and moody. Both are good, mind you, but how did this even happen? It is just bizarre what localization teams used to do back in the day. Heck, Puyo Puyo's localization was even worse. It became an entirely different game. Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. Released on both Genesis and Game Gear, it is quite literally Puyo Puyo with a Sonic skin. I mean, I can see why Sega of America went to such extremes with porting this one, since Puyo Puyo's original incarnation was a bit anime. Now, don't get me wrong, Puyo Puyo's a fine game. I'm just not good at it. Now, Tetris, I can reach some pretty nutty scores, but with Puyo Puyo, 9-year-old me manifests itself and turns my brain into a toaster. Now that we finished talking about the major release, other media, and American Puyo Puyo, we've just got 2 more spin-offs to cover before we get out of here. Starting with, oh come on, Sonic Chaos on the Game Gear is the next release, and great, we're back on this thing. Welcome to Crunchville, where you can't see more than 2 feet in front of you, but you're moving at 16 miles per hour. Now, Sonic Chaos is another Sega of America does a funny, because in Japan it's actually just named Sonic and Tails. Fittingly so, since this is the first Game Gear game where you can actually play as Tails. Now, it was also released on the Master System, but again, only in PAL regions, since America and Japan had thoroughly moved on from the Master System at this point. But Brazil and I sure didn't. The Brazilian company Tectoy has had the rights to manufacture and sell Sega consoles since the mid-90s, and they have been manufacturing and selling heavily modified Master Systems to this day. So I'm moving to Brazil. The story is that Eggman is after the Chaos Emeralds and is destroying South Island to get them. If he isn't stopped, the whole island will sink into the sea, which means that every zone will be just like Labyrinth Zone, and we can't have that! If you play as Sonic, you can collect the Chaos Emeralds from special stages, which you can access by collecting 100 rings. Yeah, you need 100 now. Good luck with that. Sure, you don't need to take them all the way to the end of the level, but 100?! However, if you play as Tails, you can't access the special stages and instead just get an extra life. The special stages are much more like normal stages this time, being just platforming challenges instead of the usual mini-game bullcrap we've gotten for the past several games, which is pretty cool, but it also means that by playing Tails, you're missing out on 6 of the game's most interesting stages, so don't play as Tails. Enough about the special stages, I want to see the standard ones. The first zone of Sonic Chaos is Turquoise Hill. It is just Green Hill Zone, except there's 200 springs everywhere, and there's a new power-up called Rocket Shoes that essentially let you skip the entire level once you nab them, because the levels are so short and the flight is so fast that you reach the end before the power-up wears off. Best addition to the game, 10 out of 10. The boss is a complete joke, and we're on to the next zone, Gigalopolis Zone. It's a futuristic city that you speed pass in seconds. Boss is Big Worm. The third zone, Sleeping Egg, is really weird. It's got this psychedelic color scheme going on and a ridiculous amount of bottomless pits. The boss is Eggman on a pogo stick. The fourth zone is Mecha Green Hill Zone. Wait. Green Hill Zone was the fourth zone in Sonic 2, and Mecha Green Hill Zone is the fourth zone in Sonic Chaos. Could it be? Is this the reason that Green Hill Zone was the fourth zone in Sonic 2 on the Game Gear? Or was this all a complete coincidence due to developer laziness? What do you think? Anyway, it's a really hazardous zone with a lot of spikes. The boss is a weird beetle monkey thing that's kind of annoying. The fifth area is Aqua Planet, which is the water zone of the game and is directly inspired by Labyrinth Zone. Yeah, it's awful. Spears, drowning, annoying badniks, the whole 9 yards. On top of that, this makes the Game Gear run even slower than usual. So not only will you be moving slowly because of water, you'll be lagging on top of it. You will enjoy it! The boss is an ovoid bird squid thing that launches projectiles and bounces all over the place. The final zone is Electric Egg, and it's your run-of-the-mill mechanical traps everywhere stage. Honestly, if you swap the background for blue rocks, you'd have a hard time figuring out whether this was Electric Egg or Scrambled Egg Zone from Sonic 2 on the Game Gear. They have that much in common. The boss is fine, and beating him prompts Sonic or Tails to chase down Eggman. If you're playing as Sonic and already had the previous 5 Chaos Emeralds, chasing Eggman will prompt him to drop the 6th, and you'll be able to use those to save South Island from a watery grave. If you didn't get the 5 from the special stages, the island sinks into the ocean and it's time to reboot the game and do better. Or just play as Tails, because he gets the good ending no matter what, the lucky bastard. Sonic Chaos is just okay. It's a little frustrating and extremely forgettable, but if the Game Gear was your only handheld console, it's an alright time. Speaking of the Game Gear, the next game we're going to talk about also has a Game Gear version, but it's just a downscaled, sad, and uninteresting version of the game. So we aren't going to talk about it. Sonic Spinball. It finally happened! Sega looked at all the pinball stages in the last games and went, we should just make a pinball game. So they did. I wonder why they never did again. The game opens with a pretty good title screen soundtrack and a cutscene where Sonic is knocked into the ocean around Eggman's new Veg-O fortress. Not sure why it's called that. Once you start the game properly, Sonic jumps out of the water and... Wait, why does he look like that? That's because the designs in Sonic's Sin Ball are heavily based on the Sonic cartoons we talked about earlier. Some of the cartoon-specific characters show up too, like the Freedom Fighters or Scratch the Chicken. Anyway, after gawking at Sonic's hairstyle for a solid minute, you can start the first stage, the Toxic Caves. Despite being named after my room, this is the most forgiving stage in the entire game, because the middle is not an instant kill. You have a chance to get back out if you fall in. Now, the goal of every level in Sonic Spat Ball is to collect all the Chaos Emeralds to open up the boss arena and take said boss down. Everything else just gives you points, which can earn you some extra lives, but you're only going to get 1 or 2 of them, so don't even bother. This game is a lot of fun. At least to me, anyway. There are a lot of people who don't seem to like this game very much, probably because of the luck involved with pinball as a whole. But come on, you're playing a pinball game, you should be expecting that kind of thing. You can maneuver Sonic in the air with the D-pad, but only a little. Most of your control comes from the various flippers and bumpers to ricochet Sonic off of. Now, the bosses are pretty freaky looking in this game, with their weird mechanical screeching and Eggman's distorted face being slapped on every single one of them. They can be a pretty startling sight to kids that encounter them, but I've read both Sonic comics, this is nothing to me. The first of these is the Scorpion, who is an utter pushover, and falling out of the arena is a near impossibility if you're trying even a little. Now, after every level, you are sent to a bonus stage where you can nab extra lives and continues. This first one features the SatAM characters trapped in these pods, and it's up to you to free them. Please do, we haven't seen official material with these guys since Archie went down.
The next level has some of the best music in the entire Sonic series, and to express my love for it, I'm going to try and play it on the recorder.
Lava Powerhouse is the second stage of Spinball, and this is where things start heating up. The middle is not safe anymore. There's much more sections where you have to control Sonic with the D-pad, and the emeralds are much harder to get. This stage also introduces a couple of kangaroo characters that show up in the Sonic Archie comic several times. Why did I mention that? Because nobody remembers these guys exist. The boss here is the Egg Boiler, a weird red tube full of Eggman heads. These bosses are getting progressively more strange. The bonus stage has you blowing out Eggman's teeth. Where do they get the ideas for these things?
Third stage is just called the Machine. Bring a wrench.
Now this stage is where 9-year-old me got stuck for ages. It feels like there was supposed to be a level in between Lava Powerhouse and the Machine, because without it the difficulty curve becomes 2 difficulty curves with a big jump in the middle. You need to slam your head into the wall over and over again to figure out what you're supposed to do in this stage. It isn't as simple as, say, the barrel busting in Toxic Caves, where you clearly see that you need to go into that tube 2 more times to get through to the minecart. In the Machine, you need to jump into this energy chamber to stop this unrelated thing from rotating. Hold Sonic in place on these to make him go up like an elevator. Burst open these cages because there's an emerald in one of them, and not fall into any of these holes because they all send you back into the middle. It's gonna take you a long while to figure all this out. In fact, you'll probably lose all of your lives before you figure out where all the Chaos Emeralds are. Which is incredibly frustrating when you got through the mildly annoying Toxic Caves level, the absolutely buggered Lava Powerhouse level, and now you have to do both of those all over again. 9-year-old me did not run into this issue because he was a puss and save scummed the entire time. I only started running into this issue when recording gameplay for this video, and trust me, it made me want to save scum a lot. Once you finally do figure this all out and get all the Chaos Emeralds, you get to the boss fight, which is the the Veg-O Machine. And whereas the last 2 bosses were just unsettling and kinda weird looking, this one is just sad because you have to watch a bunch of animals be turned into idiotic robots you destroy in one hit. Bust the tubes feeding the machine, then jump in and blast it apart from the inside. The bonus stage is blasting a bunch of copies of Scratch from the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic Spinball is the only game in the entire series to reference both cartoons. I commend, nay, I congratulate it. This is a feat that none else would possibly manage because both of these shows are so old that Sega constantly forgets that they have the rights to them.
The final stage is complete misery, so you better have a lot of extra lives saved up or you'll be back at the Toxic Caves before you can say chili dog.
The Showdown is the name of Stage 4, and it's what caused me to start save scumming again. It's one big boss fight with the Egghead himself. It is extremely easy to fall off and die since most of the stage is up in the sky. I guarantee you I did not mean to rhyme, I had just thought it up on a dime. While the stage is extremely punishing and the biggest challenge the game has to offer, it's also much shorter than all the other stages, especially the machine. Once you take him down, you treat it to your final score and the worst credits theme of all time. My ears are bleeding as we speak. Please free me! Now, if you did want to play Spinball yourself for some strange reason, it's a little harder to do than most of the other classic Sonic games, because instead of actually being released in any of the most recent collections on modern consoles, its last re-release was back in the Xbox 360 era. It's kinda strange that it hasn't been re-released as often as the other classic titles when it used to be paired with them pretty frequently.
And you know, I think I figured out why none of these games have really shown up in any of the recent Sega collections. It's because Sega wants us to forget about their mistakes. Which, yeah, ignoring your mistakes works to some extent, but for my mistakes, they only go away if I bury them.
Snake, are you okay? Snake? Snake?
That's because the designs in Sonic Sinball, where you do sin